Here's a question. Does your independent comic book need to be in a comic book shop? Hi, I'm Gamal Hennessy. I'm an attorney, author, and business consultant who specializes in the comic book industry. Now, if you've been keeping track of what's going on in the industry over the past few months, you know that between the bankruptcy at Diamond and the tariffs flying around all over the world, distribution in the direct market is not necessarily a sure thing right now. So, this is actually a good time to ask the question, does your comic need to be in a comic book shop? Now, it's not a trick question. Not every comic belongs in comic book shops. You may have discovered comics, if you're of a certain age, you may have discovered comics in a comic book shop 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, or in my case, like 40 years ago. But the situation has evolved. There are now multiple distribution channels for comics, and not every comic fits into every distribution channel. So, the two questions that you have to ask to find the right distribution channels for your book is who is your ideal reader and where do they go to buy things? Now, to figure out the ideal reader for a comic, you have to deconstruct your book in terms of demographics, psychographics, generation, genre, and format. I know that's a lot of words, but I can explain it. It's not that complicated. Demographics is simply the identifiable categories that you use to identify your ideal reader, whether you're talking about gender, race, education level, things that can be looked at and measured. Psychographics is more of the way the ideal reader looks at the world, the way that they solve problems, what it is that they are interested in. Generation is the time period that they were born in, whether that's Gen X or millennial or alpha or whatever. The genre is the type of story that you're telling, whether that's science fiction, romance, comedy, or any combination of those subgenres. And format is the way the comic is presented, whether that's graphic novel or floppy or vertical scroll or whatever. Once you actually figure out how readers of comics like yours, how they read their comics, who they are, where they go, you will then identify the ideal reader for your comic. The location is simply where do they shop? There are approximately 2,000 to 3,000 comic book stores scattered across America. But if your ideal reader doesn't go to the comic book shop or can't go to the comic book shop or doesn't know where the comic book shop is, it doesn't make sense to put your comic in a place where they can't get it. If your ideal readers really focus on reading webtoons, then it you may not need to go to a comic book shop. If they primarily go to bookstores or scholastic book fairs, then your comic isn't going to necessarily do well in a comic book shop. If they go to crowdfunding or conventions or anything else, then the comic book shop may be a nice piece to have, but with everything going on and the economics of getting your comic into a comic book shop, it may be something that doesn't need to be a priority for your publishing. Now, at Comics Experience, we discuss these kind of permutations and shifting kind of distribution issues, along with a lot of other creative, business, and legal issues in comics on a regular basis. At the end of the month, we're going to have a special presentation where we bring in experts from comic book shops, crowdfunding, digital distribution, and libraries to discuss the future of distribution in comics. If you'd like to register for that free event, there's going to be some information down in the description. So I hope to see you all there. And until then, please get off the internet and go make some comics.